So I'm sure a lot of you know at this point that a lot of bands do get comparisons a lot. There are several bands out there where I guess like there's a lot of debates going on about which band is better, and sometimes they don't even necessarily have to be similar bands, but I think for the most part they do. Most of the bands that have been compared throughout music do happen to be very similar. Like you had debates on Led Zeppelin versus Deep Purple, you had debates on Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest, and of course Metallica versus Megadeth. So for the topic of this video, we will be taking a look at two bands that did form around the same time, both formed in the 90s. Obviously one has been out longer than the other, but yeah, these are two bands from one subgenre of melodeath, and they are In Flames and Soilwork. And these are two bands that we will be comparing. So there is obviously mixed opinions about this. Obviously there's people that do prefer In Flames over Soilwork. There's people who do prefer Soilwork over In Flames. Now, if you want to know where I stand in this, well, if you guys know me well enough, I'm more of an In Flames guy. But of course, I do think that both bands have their advantages and disadvantages, so we'll go ahead and take a look at them. Now, as far as both their new albums, like when it comes to both bands' new albums, Verklighten by Soilwork and I the Mask by In Flames, I'm going to have to go with I the Mask as the better album. Now, obviously, you could consider that just me being more of an In Flames fan, but solely I do think it is just a better album overall, and I think it's one of those albums that like you can't just go into without hearing anything else by the band, because I know that there are some people that, aren't really too experienced with In Flames that have checked out the album and said, it's nothing that special. I mean, I will agree that it's nothing special, but to think that it's below good is really absurd, considering what the last two albums were. And you see, I think that's really the problem with some people. There's some people that just look at the album for what it is, and that's it, They won't, compare it to the past work because they haven't even listened to the past work that In Flames has done. I mean, comparing I the Mask to the last two albums, Battles and Siren Charms, I mean, I the Mask looks like a masterpiece compared to those albums. And yeah, I do think it is their best album, at least since Sounds of a Playground Fading. Now, don't get it twisted. I do think Soilwork's latest album, Verklighten, was also pretty good, but it did lack some replay value, I think, and I don't think it was as good as their last album, which was The Ride Majestic. Now, if we were to take a look at both bands and see, and take a look at their last albums, which would be, of course, The Ride Majestic and Battles, obviously, The Ride Majestic is a way better album. I mean, that's a no-brainer, and even as someone who does prefer In Flames over Soilwork, I mean, there's really no denying that, yeah, The Ride Majestic is better than Battles. So obviously, as you can tell, sometimes it does depend on the album too. I think if it were still like a few years ago, as far as like later releases go, yeah, Soilwork was on top of their game. But I don't know if I could really say that now. But again, I'm looking at both their discographies like as a whole and like just which bands really had the better music overall. And there's actually a few reasons why I do think In Flames is the better band. And I think that, for one, they have more diversity. So that's something that Soilwork has pretty much lacked. I mean, I know some people might complain that In Flames is pretty inconsistent throughout their discography, but at least they took some creative risks. I feel like Soilwork, on the other hand, never really stepped outside of the box all that much. I felt like ever since Natural Born Chaos, that was like really the first step into their current sound. And I think ever since then they've kind of just stuck with that sound, like having a melodeath, sound to it, but adding like so much melody to it, almost sounding like metalcore. Now, if we were to take a look at both bands' like older albums, like the 90s and early 2000s albums, of course, with In Flames you had The Jester Race, Lunar Strain, Colony, and with Soilwork, you had Steel Bath, Chain Heart Machine, Predator's Portrait, of course. And again, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. In Flames definitely takes the cake for this one. They definitely were on top of their game in the 90s. And I think that the In Flames albums, Lunar Strain and The Jester Race, just those albums alone, I think, pretty much totally destroy anything Soilwork has ever done, from the very beginning to now. But like I also said before, I do think In Flames has just done a lot better with their music. They actually took some creative risks with their music. Now, let's first talk about the vocals. Now, the vocals, I do think, are something that is more superior with In Flames than Soilwork. Now, Bjorn, by all means, does not have a bad voice. He just has one of those voices that I can really only take so much of, and his vocals oftentimes really overstay its welcome. Now, again, I don't think he has that bad of a voice, but like when he screams, like with his scream vocals, he sounds like he's more so like yelling or shouting more so than using actual like melodeath scream vocals, you could say. And I think that's one of the main issues I have with it. It's kind of something that I can only tolerate for just a little bit, and then I move on to something else. Now, In Flames has had actually several different styles of screaming vocals throughout their career. Obviously, whenever In Flames first started, they used more traditional like scream vocals that typically that subgenre is known for, which I did like. I mean, there's really no going wrong with it. But of course, you can tell whenever Anders joined In Flames, the band really started to aim towards a more alternative metal sound that obviously divided some fans. And I know, people want to, say, oh, they got worse after Reroute to Remain, or A Sense of Purpose was whenever the band really went downhill. And at the time, even In Flames was taking some creative risks. Even though some of the risks weren't really all that great, but at least they tried something different. Now, like I said before, I don't think Bjorn has that bad of a voice. He actually has a pretty good voice. And this isn't to say that Anders has the best voice in the world either, and I'm talking as far as his clean vocals go, too. That's not to say that his clean vocals aren't anything, to write home about, but I don't know. I do think it is more tolerable, at least for me, than Bjorn's voice. Let's go into the instruments, too. Now, I also do think that instrumentally, In Flames also, I think, would take the cake with this one. Now, Soilwork has had good instrumentation within their music, don't get me wrong. I mean, I know that I said that their latest album, Verklighten, didn't age too well, but I think instrumentally, it is a very good album. I mean, it really is. I think instrumentally, you could say it's one of their best. But, I mean, comparing it to, like, the instrumentation that's in Flames music is almost, like, not even comparable, because I think, if you take a look at the instrumentation in albums like The Jester Race, or Reroute to Remain, Come Clarity, Sense of Purpose, or even stuff as recent as Sounds of a Playground Fading, I mean, the instrumentation in all those albums, I think, are really fantastic, and they're very unique and creative, and they deliver this atmosphere that I think Soilwork lacks. Now, I will give Soilwork this. I think as far as their more recent albums, they do a better job as far as instrumentation goes, especially in the Ride Majestic and Verklighten. I think both those albums instrumentally are really good. Not so much as far as the instrumentation in Soilwork's older material. Like, you take a look at the previous albums like Predator's Portrait, which I think instrumentally is good, but it's nothing that really makes you feel like, wow, that'll really blow your mind so much. And that's not to say that Soilwork's more recent albums will blow your mind instrumentally either, but they get the job done well, I think. So overall, I do think that there are more pros to In Flames than there are to Soilwork. Now, that's not to say that I don't think Soilwork's great. I do think they're a great band, but they miss a lot of things that In Flames has. I mean, I think In Flames has a lot of things that Soilwork kind of doesn't. But obviously this is just my opinion, and this is actually a definitive opinion. This isn't just something that like is based on my mood, like, oh, I only like this band based on my mood or something. No, I've pretty much always liked In Flames more than Soilwork ever since the start. Obviously, I do think that there are albums better than others, and I think that's really the thing about it, too. And I think a lot of people can agree that I think it does depend on the album we're talking about, too. Like, if we're comparing Stabbing the Drama to Battles, then yeah, that's a no-brainer. I mean, and if, of course, if you were to compare Lunar Strain to Sworn to a Great Divide, obviously that's a no-brainer, too. So, yeah, I know it's sort of mixed for some people, but do you agree with me? Because I think overall, I just enjoy In Flames more consistently. They have a lot more variety and diversity. And like I said before, I think that the albums Lunar Strain and The Jester Race, those albums alone are better than anything Soilwork has done, I think. So let me know what you guys think. And which band do you like more? Do you like them both? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Take care.